Welcome to Mission Evolution Radio Show with Gwilda Wiyaka, bringing together today's leading experts to uncover ever-deepening spiritual truths and the latest scientific developments in support of the evolution of humankind. For more information on Mission Evolution Radio with Gwilda Wiyaka, visit www.missionevolution.org. And now, here's the host of Mission Evolution, Miss Gwilda Wiyaka.
Do our thoughts dictate reality? If so, can we change our reality by simply changing the way we think? Mission Evolution Radio TV show is coming to you around the world on the X1 Broadcast Network, xzbn.net. With us this hour to explore the power of thought is an old friend of Mission Evolution, COLM HOLLAND. COLM is the original publisher of the global bestseller, The Alchemist by Paulo Coelho, author of the Amazon #1 book, The Secrets of the Alchemist, and editor of The True Origins of Jesus, The Myth Behind the Man. His latest book is By Accident Most Strange, If Thoughts Could Kill. His website, colmholland.com. Colm, thanks for joining us again on Mission Evolution.
Hi, Gwilda. It's great to be here again. Good to see you.
How is it over there in the UK?
Oh, we've had a beautiful week. Thank you. Yeah. Makes a nice change to get some nice sun.
Yeah. I'm spoiled by the sun. I'm up here in Colorado, so.
Yeah, lucky you.
Lucky me. So how did you become interested in the power of thought?
It was something that I read by Professor Carl Jung, actually. And it's a quote that you don't see stated very often when people refer to Carl Jung. I'll just quickly read it to. It's only one sentence long. It's in Memories, Dreams, Reflections, which is a sort of autobiography by him, where he says, everything in the unconscious seeks outward manifestation. And the persona also desires to evolve out of its unconscious conditions and to experience itself as a whole. So what Jung theorized was that the human psyche wants to be whole. That's its default mode. In other words, everything that the psyche is trying to do is to bring together both the unconscious part of our mind and the conscious part of our mind into a whole. But unfortunately, and this was one of his great breakthroughs really in thinking about the human mind, is that we constantly, as we evolve through our lifetime, we repress so much into the unconscious part of the mind, which he called the shadow. And of course, I'm sure most of your listeners have heard of the shadow. But what he also said was that the unconscious wants to manifest those thoughts, those feelings, those conditions that exist within the unconscious part of the mind. And the personality, which he, in this case, he's referring to as the conscious part of the mind, everyday thought process, wants unity, wants there to be a wholeness between the conscious part of the mind and the unconscious part of the mind. So whether we like it or not, we are permanently manifesting out of our own unconscious mind. With or without our effort, that's going to happen.
That's kind of scary.
Yeah.
Isn't a lot of what's in the unconscious our damage and our defense mechanisms?
Yes. Well, we have to sort of squirrel things away. So trauma, pain, quite often, child abuse in childhood that we've received. These things, and I've written about this in my Secret of the Alchemist book, of course, and you and I have had this conversation before, but we repress. Both Freud and Jung talked about repression in a great deal. It's like trying to push the apples down in a barrel of water, and we're constantly pushing them down, hoping them, they're not going to rise up, because we don't want to be conscious of that pain every day. It's really hard to get through a day if we're constantly being reminded, and if that pain isn't faced and isn't dealt with, according to Jung, and Freud, of course, talked about this as well, then it will rise again, as it were. So those apples are going to keep popping up. And I think you and I were talking recently about triggers.
Yes, and that's going to be an interesting one to go into. what fascinates
Yeah.
me is if we indeed manifest from the unconscious mind, and the unconscious
Yeah.
mind is chock full of damage and distortion, it kind of scary what we might be putting out there.
Yeah. Yes. Just a little segue here. Just think about Carl Jung's life, because it's quite a great example, really. When he hit around 40, he was about 40 years old, midlife, which he said was a really important time for the psyche, by the way. Lots of stuff happens in the midlife period of human development. But he just recently broken off his relationship with Sigmund Freud. And it was really traumatic. It was quite a major event, more for Jung than I think than for Freud. And he went into a really interesting form of nervous breakdown.
Oh,
And it was almost a calculated nervous breakdown. Don't forget, he'd been a doctor in a hospital, dealing with patients with schizophrenia, and he'd been quite successful in that. So it wasn't as though he didn't understand nervous breakdown and what it looked like, but he chose to allow his unconscious mind unfettered expression, which I don't recommend it.
I was
By the
going to
way,
say, it sounds scary to me. Yeah.
no, you'd have to quit your day job, which I did actually. I had a much shorter period of nervous breakdown when I was in my 20s. Again, I didn't know Young had done this, but I also volunteered to myself to go and face the elements that lived in my unconscious, and I can talk about that in a bit. But yeah, Young, it was like a controlled experiment on himself. And he didn't feel that he could ask anybody else to perform it, and he wanted to study it. So he'd get up in the morning and he'd be with his family and have breakfast, and he'd go into his office, and he would just get into a meditative state where his unconscious mind could reveal, like nightmares, really, all the symbols and all the images that he believed were buried in there, and over a period of a couple of years, he recorded these, he drew them, he wrote about them, and it produced a book called The Red Book. And for anybody who's interested in the contents of Carl Jung's unconscious mind, and if they want to compare it to their own, then the Red Book is a great read. You can get most of it online. You don't have to buy. It's a huge volume, by the way. But yeah, so off the back of that, he was able to develop this whole notion that he had that we've got two elements to our unconscious mind. We've got those things that we repress, the traumas and the dark things that we regard as dark, and the things we regard of no real value to our everyday life. And we've got all that stuff pushed down and hopefully under control, which it isn't actually, but it's a bit of a delusion to think that it is under control. And then the other side of the coin was that he believed that we all share in our unconscious, the collective unconscious, as he called it, images in common. And when he was working with his patients later in life, when they thought that he was trying to help them with their issues, he was actually conducting experiments on them, totally ethically, of course, or not, as the case may be. But he was wanting to see if they would manifest out of their unconscious anything that might produce similar images to the sorts of things that he would. Because Jung also had a huge theory about mythology. He believed that mythology was the result of the content, the manifestation of the contents of the unconscious mind in an unconscious way. So when somebody wrote a story like Ulysses, or any of the Greek myths, and even Paulo Coelho with the Alchemist, what they're doing there is they are sort of the images of their unconscious mind are spilling out into the conscious mind in the form of story in mythology.
Well, I find this particularly interesting because you think of the science fiction writers. When I was in
Yeah.
college, I devoured science fiction rather than read my texts, of course. But now I can look out around me, and three-fourths of what Asimov wrote about has manifested.
Yeah.
From
Interesting,
18
isn't it?
to, yeah, it's interesting. So, by what you're saying, am I correct in
Hmm.
assuming that writing those science fiction was actually delving into the collective unconscious whereby we were manifesting?
Yes, yes. And of course, that's at I would call that that's at the big end, where we can actually now see the inventions. But then we should also think about the little, almost the little end. And what I mean by that is at an individual level, to go back to your first question, really. So, are we constantly manifesting the contents of our unconscious mind in our everyday lives, in the way we think, in both positively and negatively, of course? Are we manifesting the quality of life as a result of that? Is that coming out of our unconscious mind? Well, Jung would say yes. And I think I would agree with him on that, that most of us live lives that have a color. I call it like a color to how we see the world. We might see the world through extremely pessimistic eyes, or we may see the world through delusional, optimistic eyes, as
Well,
well.
it is time for us to take a station break. And on the other side, we'll get into those eyes. Column and I will return very shortly. So don't go away. This is Mission Evolution, www.missionevolution.org. Do you know what you're thinking? With us this hour discussing the power of thought is Colm Holland. Colm is the author of By Accident Most Strange, If Thoughts Could Kill. Colm, when we're manifesting, and a lot of it apparently we can manifest from the conscious mind, right, as well as the
Yeah.
unconscious. Okay,
Yes.
but when we're managing from the unconscious, if we're unconscious of it, we haven't processed it, we haven't matured it, haven't matured through it. There's a lot of flotsam in there in the unconscious.
Yeah.
So is that what our world is mostly made of? Is everybody's unconscious flotsam?
Yeah, yes, yes and no. Um, Probably Carl Jung's most famous quote, the one that most people can probably quote you, is when he said, "Unless you make the unconscious mind conscious, then it will control you, and you will call it fate."
Oh, isn't that fascinating?
Yeah. So
Yeah. Okay.
let's just unwrap that for a second. So when he talks about fate, um, the meaning that he's bringing to it, and I think is most common really, is that stuff happens to us outside of our control. Yeah. So we get involved in a relationship, the relationship goes sour, we feel that we had no control over that relationship, and we say, well, that was fate, that was how it was meant to be, and there was nothing I can do about it. He proposed that there are other ways of looking at that, and that is that we are consistently making unconscious decisions based on bits of information which may be relevant or may not be relevant. And even when we make those decisions, at times we do feel that we're not really in control of the decisions we make. So we sort of fall into things. We make decisions by default rather than by design. And then we sort of step back once we're in the thick of it, as it were, and we go, well, if only I'd been more aware of why I was making those decisions, why I got myself into this situation. But I just felt I was, under some kind of compulsion. I just sort of had to do it. My feelings and emotions drove me forward. And then, of course, the ultimate sort of crisis point that can lead to is a form of psychosis. For those not too sure what psychosis. So psychosis is when the mind really starts to lose a grip on reality.
Well,
When we're
that's kind of a difficult thing, because if we create reality but we lose grip on reality,
yeah.
help me out there. How does that happen?
Yeah, so they usually psychosis is normally the result of some kind of trauma. It can be triggered by a trauma in real time now, so a terrible accident, a really difficult grief situation, loss of a job. It can be a breakup of a relationship. All manner of things can trigger a psychosis. But when somebody is in psychosis or in a psychotic state, they completely, to everybody else around them and from the outside, it's obvious that they're not in touch with the reality. But to them, that is their new reality. It is real. And the problem for them is that normally it's almost impossible to get out of it by on your own. It's a mental state that no longer has any anchors in the real world, and people sometimes imagine themselves to be historical characters, or they feel that paranoia is a really good example of a state of psychosis. Somebody under the bed is going to jump out and attack us when, of course, there isn't anybody there. Somebody's going to break in and wreck our home when actually nobody's going to break in, and so on and so on. So
I can't help but notice, Colm, it sounds like you've described a population at large.
Let's be more generous than that. Let's not confuse psychosis with delusion. So that I would agree with you, and I would actually say we are all deluded in some way, and I don't mean that in a disparaging way. I don't, I'm not sort of trying to scaremonger anybody here, but there are states of delusion where we imagine things to be a certain way when the facts just don't stack up. That really isn't the case. I'm trying to think of an easy example. For example, somebody might think that they've got unlimited amount of financial funds. For example, I've got 3 credit cards and I just keep spending the credit cards, and it's not a problem. The money's going to come in. I don't have to work. I don't have to actually do anything. I can just keep spending the money and it'll all be fine. And then, of course, the big shock comes when you can't pay the money back and you can't get the money off the credit card. So that's a really simple example of a deluded state. But there are other states of delusion that we can be in. Sometimes our religious beliefs are delusional, in the sense that things that to most people are obviously meant to be mythology with meaning, symbols with meaning. If we go that one step too far and believe these things to actually be real, and they have power, and we can continuously call upon that power to do whatever we want it to do, then it doesn't work out, of course. That again can be a delusional state. But
I have a clarification I'm going to need here. So if we create our reality out of our unconscious and conscious thoughts,
yep,
and yet being delusional is being out of touch with reality, how does that add up?
Yeah, quite. Well, reality is what we believe it to be. And that was something Jung was really clear on. So we create our own reality, for sure. And there are the psyche has numerous checks and balances. Some people say, "Oh, I'm really skeptical. People say this. I should believe this, or I should think that, or this is true, or that. But I'm really skeptical. I'm not sure about that." That's one of the checks and balances that's already built into the psyche, and it's really important. We should listen to our skepticism all the time. I still do. I believe lots of things to be true. I believe, for example, in the power of unconditional love. But even when I believe in the power of unconditional love, which we can talk about as we go on, I'm still skeptical about when it should be applied or when it should not be applied. Maybe tough love needs to be applied in certain circumstances. But to go back to manifestation of thoughts, the key is that we are constantly manifesting a reality of some description. Now, Jung's whole point was that if we can be the more conscious we can be of our thoughts, the more in touch we can be with what is real compared to what we believe might be real, then that will lead to a greater wholeness of life. And that
for the masses as well as the individual, I would take it.
For both, yes.
Yeah. Okay.
He Jung, of course, lived at the dawn of the Second World War in Switzerland when Nazi Germany was coming to power, and he was watching the German society and the German culture, and was even predicting the way it was going. He had no idea of where it would end up, but he was pretty accurate on it. And he sort of said, well, there's nothing we can do about it because this is a form of mass delusion. And I'm sure you can think of other countries right now where there are certain instances of mass delusion happening.
Well, would that be like a cult mentality, say, for instance? You get a whole bunch of people together and they agree on a reality, and then it kind of seems to manifest around them.
Yes.
But it's reality, actually?
Yeah, well, it's the reality that they've created, but it's localized. It only belongs to that group. When you think that we've got 3 trillion people on the planet right now, there's going to be lots of realities out there, and we all adhere to some form of belief and mythology. Some is helpful and some isn't. So Jung's not saying that we can escape mild states of delusion. We're all going to be in them. What the trick, according to him, was to be aware of it. If you can be aware of your thoughts, when they're erroneous and not helpful, when they're good and when they're positive, and engage them to work in our favor, that's part of the secret of individuation, as he called it, or wholeness. And he also said something really interesting, which a lot of people don't, have criticized me for saying this, but Jung said, up until about the age of 40, you're just learning. You're just figuring stuff out. You're just collecting information. And one of the problems with midlife, and the reason that many people experience what we call a midlife crisis, is that you've sort of collected enough to have to make an existential decision. What is my life? What is my importance to myself and to the world and to those around me? What is my purpose? Where am I going? So how we've dealt with unconscious thoughts and the mythology that we believe will be really significant at that point, and they will all come into question, he said, in middle age.
Well, Colm and I will be right back to continue our discussion. You stay right there. On the other side of this quick break, we'll be back. This is Mission Evolution, www.missionevolution.org. Who controls what you're thinking? This is Mission Evolution, missionevolution.org. Our guest this hour is COLM Holland. His website, colmholland.com. Colm, we've been talking about how, we have cults where they manifest in a local area, their particular reality, or we become delusional and we're not in touch with the agreed upon reality. But it's kind of hard to look at the media and this and that and not realize that it looks like somebody else is dictating what the masses think on a large level, and we're eating it up like there's no tomorrow. Is that actually changing what we're manifesting?
Yes. In a way, I call that sort of proxy manifesting. In other words, we've relinquished the individual responsibility for what we manifest when we sort of hook ourselves on to whatever our crowd believes, whatever our crowd is doing, whatever our crowd says is important, what we should be doing. When we abandon our own individual questioning of that and just accept that as true and accept that as the way forward, then Carl Jung would say, then what you're really doing is you're by proxy, you're allowing somebody else to determine and dictate what you think and what you believe, and so on. That doesn't mean that you can't agree with other people at all, but the importance from Jung's point of view for wholeness is that we should be able to pick and choose carefully those things that we believe are real and important to us, not just because our friend down the road says it, or a group online says it, or some politician said this is the truth and you should believe this, otherwise we're all heading for disaster, as it were. But yes, and of course climate change is a great example of this, where you've got several camps who believe that it's a complete hoax and it's just a mythology that's made up, and others who are completely determined that we as a species are destroying the very planet that we live on. And how you as an individual, I'm not saying either is right or wrong, because there's only one person who can actually decide that, and that's you. And it is beholden on us in situations where it affects our global position and our future, to take the time and actually put in the effort to sort through the information and look at the sources of the information, not just accept them because I say it, or because some scientist of great renown says it, or some politician who disagrees with the scientist says it. Then it really is beholden on you as an individual to make up your own mind. And I remember when I was at university, when I left university and became a school teacher, that was the first job I ever had. One of my great motivations, I remember, would be get a class of kids and I'd say, you need to be making up your own mind on what you believe and what you do and how you behave, and that's how you grow up. That's how you become a responsible adult, and that's still true whether we're 14 or 64.
So when we're looking at and fact checking for ourselves and looking at, say, the environment or the global warming or this sort of thing, it seems like there's a really delicate dance to do here. One is, if you're thinking positive, have hopeful thoughts, hopefully that's what you're manifesting. But when does that become delusional and denial? How can you tell where you're at in that continuum?
I think we have to go back to our own individual thoughts then at that point. I think on global issues, on collective issues, it is a case of you forming an opinion, and forming an opinion in a as informed a way as you possibly can, collecting as much information, reading stuff, not just accepting things because certain people say it. On an individual level, when we're in relationships with other people, that's the hotbed, that's the crucible, if you like, for discovering your own thoughts and what it is you're manifesting. Now, there's the impact that your behavior and your thoughts, your emotions have on those immediately close to you. That's the best indicator of what's real and what's not real. So if you've got somebody who's in a manipulative, coercive relationship with another person, and that person's going, why are you doing this to me? Why do you say these things? Why are you trying to force me to do this? When people are gaslighting others and saying, oh, you've got a problem, I'm not the one with the problem. If somebody is the perpetrator of that kind of behavior and those kind of thoughts, then that is what I would call an individual emergency situation. And so many marriage breakups, relationship breakups, the courts are full of people being taken into custody all over the world, really, where the level and the manifestation of the behavior just is downright abusive. And this, if there's a crisis at a global level, that might be, global warming. But if there's a crisis at an individual level, this is critical in my mind. Anybody who's not really doesn't really understand what they're doing and how they're behaving and what the impact of their own personal behavior is having on others, because it's all unconscious, it's not something they're particularly aware of, then those people are the ones who really need to stop and to start examining, what is it I'm thinking.
And sadly, those are the ones that are least likely to do it as a rule.
Exactly.
Because they're very invested in the reality that they've painted, where everybody else is responsible. If we're manifesting our reality, like we're talking, and a lot of it is being manifested unconsciously, what are the first steps we can take, COLM, to start bringing the unconscious to the conscious so that we can control it?
So I've got three things that I use. First of all, dreams. Carl Jung was hot on dreams, and whilst dreams can be completely chaotic and make no sense whatsoever, they usually, when we wake up, they usually leave a residue of feeling of some description. And it takes practice and it takes time. But if you're struggling to understand why you feel the way you feel, then one of the places that you can start is dreams. Recording your dreams, looking at your dreams, examining the dreams, thinking during the day after a dream, why has that dream left me feeling this particular way? The characters in the dreams are just symbols, but they are definitely important and is a good start. The second thing that I usually do is to look at what triggers my most extreme emotions. What makes me angry? What makes me sad? What makes me impatient? What makes me burst out, and be rude to other people? What makes me intolerant of other people? 9 times out of 10, the way we see other people and the way we treat other people is actually how we feel about ourselves.
Never underestimate the power of projection, right?
There you go. So have a look at that. What am I projecting? How am I projecting it? Because that really is telling me something critical about myself. And then the third is find somebody to talk to. It's really hard to do, especially if you've not been practicing it for most of your life. If you're a newbie on trying to find out what's going on in your unconscious mind, then a therapist of any description, really, somebody to talk to. And it's not that the therapist is going to have any answers. A good therapist will help you be able to begin to examine yourself. And that's how you can tell whether or not it's a useful technique, whether you've got the right therapist. Are they enabling you to see yourself as you really are? But you're the one that's got to see it.
There's no replacing insight on yourself, is there?
Exactly.
As you're speaking of this, it brings to mind just about every indigenous culture on the planet had, for their medicine people, had really severe initiations whereby they shattered their belief systems, they shattered their reality. And then that left a clean slate so that they could be available for new information to come through them.
Yeah.
Is this part of what you're talking about? And how can we apply that today?
Yeah. I've been through in younger years, in my 20s and early 30s, many moons ago now. I went through some of those personally. A general catch-all phrase for that is sort of death of the ego. Because our personality or our ego is a construct. It's something that we build through our life to be able to face other people and the way we present ourselves and the things we say and the things that we do. That is a construct. We build that. And there comes a point very often, again in middle age, when it no longer serves purpose that we've created it for. And so there's this great hollowness suddenly begins to appear. And one of the ways through that, and that can be a time when we're getting triggered all over the place. So I didn't used to be an angry person, but I don't know what's happened. Now I'm suddenly losing my temper. Somebody cut me up on the freeway, and I lost it completely. Why? I never used to do that sort of thing. So there are various therapies that can enable. I mean, there are dozens of them actually. Again, as you say, in various cultures, that can enable you to, in a controlled way, to go through what we call the death of the ego. And
so we're going to have to pick up on the death of the ego, or the shamanic death, or the dark night of the soul, if you will, on the other side of a break. Please stay with us. COLM and I will continue to explore the hidden results of our thoughts. This is Mission Evolution, www.missionevolution.org. Do you believe your reality, or is your reality a result of what you believe? This is Mission Evolution, missionevolution.org. We're continuing our discussion with COLM Holland. His website, colmholland.com. So, COLM, that's the question of the day. Which came first, the chicken or the egg? Do we believe our reality and therefore make it so, or is it so and we have to believe it to be not off balance, psychotic, if you will?
Yeah, we are organisms, and there is no set formula on how what is a successful life, what is a successful way to be. We literally really do have to figure that out for ourselves. And we think we have lots of choices. We think we can make lots of choices in life. I'm sure you've had other guests talk about this. How much how much actual choice we have on our lives depends on all sorts of things. Is it nurture or nature, for example? If I was raised in a very abusive childhood situation, what are my chances of what's my adult life going to look like compared to somebody who had a really smooth sail all the way through childhood and adolescence? You'd think that those that had the really easy sail through would be fine, but quite often they're the ones who end up self-medicating on all kinds of substances because they never had to face a challenge.
They've never had to build any resilience. Ergo, the smallest things knocks them off their rails, right?
Correct.
Yeah.
Exactly.
So if we're, one thing that I'd like to bring up now that we're in the fourth quarter is, there's a lot of mental illness out there. And if we are manifesting what we believe and or what we think, if we're thinking ill thoughts about another person and wishing bad things would happen to them, what's going on there? How much of an impact does that have?
Well, I've just written a story about that. Funny you should mention that. My main character is a psychic, so he's already got quite a lot of sort of magical powers, as it were. But he's also a psychopath. The only thing I thought, well, the twist I'll do with this character is because this is quite often how people feel. He never actually kills anybody, but he does wish them ill. If they cross him or they get in his way, he wishes that something would happen to them so that, and without spoiling the story, stuff does happen, which is why it's called by accident. Stuff does happen. So that's an extreme situation. I mean, I've known dear people, friends of mine even, who have been gentle soul, compassionate souls, until somebody threatens somebody close to them, and within a whisper, the psyche becomes psychopathic. I wish they'd fall under a bus. I wish they'd get some dreadful disease and die. And then they're shocked, and they say, "Oh my gosh, I can't believe I'm even thinking that. I can't believe I'm even saying that." So. Again, Jung had quite a lot to say about this, and it is worth reading. I mean, he had a character called Mercurius, or Merlin is another name for it, So he said we've all got a mercurial side to our psyche, which is a counterbalance to the angelic side of our psyche. So he said that we all like to think we're actually better people than we actually are, and that it's a shock to us ourselves, those of us who like to pride ourselves on being kind and generous and so on, when suddenly an incident will occur and we can completely switch and discover ourselves. So managing those two opposite paradoxical parts of the mind is one of the paths that we have to walk. It's a fine line, and in situations of conflict and war and family tragedy and other things, those are the testing times, and those are the times that really we do have a choice. At that point, we can work towards finding. We can't make those negative, dangerous, destructive thoughts go away. Not in my experience. But
so how can we can't make them go away, but how can we prevent them from going out in the world and manifesting?
Yeah, so this is my pet theory. So you can attribute this to me. I actually believe that deep within the psyche there is an overwhelming power that we can call on. We can, if we can find it, and I've spent most of my lifetime trying to find it and nurture it, and that is the power of unconditional love. And applying that power, and that's one of the things I love about Paulo Coelho's The Alchemist as well. When he talks to the hand, Santiago talks to the hand that wrote all and discovers that the what he thought was love belonged to God and God alone. What he discovered was that he had that same power in himself. So what I teach people who come to me asking for help quite often is let's help you find that power of unconditional love within yourself, because if you can find that and apply it to yourself, apply it to those parts of yourself that you despise and that you struggle with, those negative side, the mercurius, the Merlin side of your personality. If you can do that, then you will find that there is the power to find the balance and to get into control of that. So I'm not saying it's easy, but it is possible in my experience. Yes.
Well, it's that magic moment. I get to ask you, COLM, what's your mission?
My main mission is to help people understand that they are loved for who they are rather than what they can do. Once you believe that you are loved unconditionally for who you are, then you find that what you do comes out of that motivation rather than trying to seek approval. And I think that's one of the biggest challenges that most of us face.
It's a beautiful mission, because from what you've been telling me, if we can love our shadow, we can also have control over it. It's
Correct.
not something we have to hide from. We can see it and have control over it.
That's it.
But it's quite a job, isn't it?
Yes, it is. It is hard work, but the benefits that you reap are untold. And I think it's sad when people get through, most of their lives without actually having discovered that. It's never too late, but the sooner that you can begin to work on trying to make your unconscious conscious, then the more control you will have over your life and your circumstances and how your thoughts manifest.
So let's look at this from a little different angle. Let's say that you are a person that's in the company of another person that is not being responsible for what they think or what the ill things they wish you. Is there a way to protect yourself from that?
Yes. Well, speaking the truth is the start. So quite often the people that are trying to manipulate you in that way are not speaking the truth at all. So it's really important to, in the first instance, to find people who can support you and help you hold fast to the truth of who you are, not who the other person is trying to make you into or say that degrade you in any kind of way. But if it becomes overwhelming and it's just something you can't cope with, then quite often you just have to remove yourself from that in the hope that maybe that person will change. Sometimes they do, but quite often they don't either. And so sometimes it's the hardest choice that most people ever have to make, is to say, well, I'm going to remove myself from this situation, which is sad. But on the other side of that coin, you're doing everybody a favor. So by caring for yourself, you are in fact caring for everybody around you in that instance.
Is that as a result of, if you care for yourself, then you're conscious of yourself and you're not putting out unconscious negative thoughts towards other people or the world at large?
Yes, and you're not being a victim as well, which is probably the most important bit.
It seems to me like there's an awful lot of victimhood going on out there in this day and age. It seems few people want to take responsibility for what their experience is. And yet, from what we've been saying this past hour, it is our responsibility what our experience is, because we're manifesting our thoughts.
Yes.
How would a person, we're about out of time here, but how would a person engage that through the dream work and everything you were talking about?
Yes. The most effective way is to find somebody who can help you out of that situation. If you're deep in victimhood, it's really hard to do it on your own. So finding a support group, finding individual or others who understand what it is you're dealing with and what you're trying to get out of, that's critical in my experience. And it is possible. It starts with accepting that, yes, you are a victim. You have been a victim, but you don't have to remain a victim. By engaging unconditional love, that victim can become a conqueror.
I love that. Well, it is that magic moment. Unfortunately, we are out of time. COLM, thank you so much for joining us once
Thank you,
again
Rose.
and sharing your knowledge. Our guest this hour has been COLM Holland, the author of The Secret of the Alchemist and By Accident Most Strange, If Thoughts Could Kill. To find out more about COLM, where you can find his books and all he has to offer, visit his website, colmholland.com. This has been Mission Evolution with Gwilda Wiyaka. For more information or to enjoy past archived episodes, visit www.missionevolution.org. But there's one thing you can count on, is if you meet us again right here, this mission will continue to bring resources, information, and support to our evolving world.